Dr. Gil White, so we have a new administration in the US, the Trump 2.0 administration, and there are all kinds of rumors in Israel about certain connections and ties between this new administration and Qatar, the terror sponsor state. I understand that you have done some research and taken a lot of interest in this issue, so please share with us your thoughts.
I'm mostly interested in being able to reason logically from the facts of the relationship that the U.S. bosses have, the people running the United States, with the Emirate of Qatar. There's been a relationship of long standing between U.S. bosses and Qatar. This is a strategic issue. It's not a personal issue with Trump. Qatar is the host of the largest U.S. military base, the most important U.S. military base in the entire region. The area of responsibility of CENTCOM is North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. It's a gigantic, very important military base and headquarters. And it's in Qatar, which means that the U.S. has had for a long time an intimate strategic relationship with Qatar. Now, what should we conclude from this? I think the first thing we need to look at is how dramatically Qatar needs the United States. Qatar cannot exist without the United States base. Why? Because as you mentioned, it has gigantic gas reserves. In fact, I think it's the largest gas reserves in the world.
Yes.
So
correct.
obviously Qatar is very attractive to any imperial power that wants to get a hold of those gas reserves. And therefore, Qatar cannot exist as an independent state unless it has a U.S. base there, because it's a tiny little peninsula of sand. It's entirely flat. It's the size of Connecticut. It cannot be defended. What this means is that if the United States, the protector of Qatar, would like to change Qatar's foreign policy, it could do so in a second. And therefore, the fact that Qatar's foreign policy, as you just mentioned, is to finance the growth of jihadi terrorism around the world, and in particular, jihadi terrorism directed against the state of Israel, well then, that's U.S. policy, because the U.S. bosses could change Qatari policy in a second. In a second. All they have to do is say, look, if you don't do X or Y, we will leave Qatar. We will put everything in Saudi Arabia, or we will put everything in Israel, or we will put everything somewhere else. The demonstration is that when Joe Biden told the Qataris that they had to expel Hamas leaders, which happened just a few weeks ago for the first time, Qatar was like, okay. The only reason that happened is that it had become too embarrassing that the Hamas leaders were all living in Qatar. You know, it just became too embarrassing. So Biden told them, you know, you have to kick them out, which they did. He could have told them, you need to force Hamas to return the hostages, or any of a million things that the U.S. bosses could have made Qatar do, and they don't do it. This is U.S. policy.
And also, I will add from the demographic conclusion of the country, there are, I think, almost 2.5 million people living in Qatar, but only 300,000 of them are citizens. So there isn't much population there to protect itself and to serve in military forces, and naturally it would need outside protection. So the question that rises is, what's in it for the U.S.?
Clearly, what's in it for the U.S. is whatever Qatar is doing. If the United States does not change Qatari policy, that means it's happy with Qatari policy.